I'm pretty sure I can see him in the office across from me. I'm reporting from the Yaguara offices in Denver, Colorado.
Now for our next session, I'm excited to introduce Yaguara. They're a Hawk Media partner and official e-commerce week LA sponsor, and actually our first portfolio company out of our fund. So very on target. Yaguara is a platform designed to aggregate and simply present data for all levels across your e-commerce organization. Get the insights you need to work better together. Tune in as Yaguara discusses scaling an e-commerce brand. Existing between two conflicting ideologies, it's simultaneously becoming more viable and more challenging than ever before to scale an e-commerce brand. While brands have big ideas for their businesses, scaling, growing, accelerating, they often lack a clear view into its health and ultimately lose sight of what matters most to their organization. Brian Mahoney of Arfa Inc., Jeremy Kai from Italic, Sybil Wilmot-Smith of Pop Shop Live, and Jonathan Smalley of Yaguara will discuss how to focus on what matters most. Jonathan, thanks for joining and take it away.
Hey, Eric, thanks so much. Really appreciate it. Great to be here. And thank you to the awesome panelists that are going to be here today speaking. As Eric said, I'm Jonathan. I'm the founder and CEO here at Yaguara. But more importantly, we have three really amazing panelists on today that I think are going to have some really brilliant insights into thinking about how to scale an e-commerce company and also touch on quite a bit of what we think the future of e-commerce is going to look like. So just to start things off, Sybil, why don't we start with you? Would love to just introduce yourself, give us a bit of a background on who you are, where you are now, and what you're doing.
Hi everyone, I am Sybil. I'm head of commerce at Pop Shop Live. We are a live streaming shopping platform that allows sellers to create immersive, engaging, sustainable live show format, heavily focused on conversion, retention, and organic growth. My role in particular is sourcing, onboarding, managing sellers and partnerships to ensure that they find success as quickly as possible on the platform. Most recently, prior to Pop Shop, I headed up new ventures and trends at notonthehighstreet.com back home in the UK, which is an online marketplace with a network of around 5,000 individual makers and sellers. Before that, I spent the best part of 10 years at netaporte.com. So I joined as one of the first 100 employees there, worked my way around most of the departments, but spent the bulk of my time there, so just over 6 years as a buyer, running multi-million-dollar departments across women's wear, and honestly, the best introduction in retail education I could get. And then started at Pop Shop Live springtime of this year.
Amazing. Such a really amazing background, I think, on obviously more traditional retail and now something that's pushing the boundaries in terms of commerce. So thank you so much for joining. Jeremy, why don't you take it away next and tell everyone a bit more about yourself?
Sure. First of all, thanks so much for inviting me and excited to be a part of this panel today. I'm Jeremy. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Italic. What we have is a membership that costs $100 a year. And in return, all of our members get to shop 1,000+ products that we design and develop ourselves at prices where we don't make money. So as a result of that, our prices tend to be pretty competitive, typically 60 to 80% lower than our direct-to-consumer competitors, as well as traditional incumbent brands. And prior to that, I started and ran an enterprise SaaS company, so very different than what I do today. Yeah, excited to be here.
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy. I'm currently wearing a pair of your cashmere joggers, actually.
Oh, great.
So I can vouch for their quality and for the price to value. Ryan, to finish us off with the intros, why don't you take it away?
Yeah, thanks a lot. I love the pandemic uniform, by the way. Like, I'm going to wear something presentable up top, but then comfortable, hopefully cashmere jogging pants down below. That's great. I'm also happy that all the panelists got the memo about wearing black with our respective backgrounds. That looks pretty sharp. So thanks for having me. It's lovely to be here, although I'm sort of sad that we can't all be together in Los Angeles. My name is Brian Mahoney. I am the co-founder and chief technology officer at a company called Arfa. Arfa is a platform for the creation of multiple direct-to-consumer brands that we say we co-pilot. So what that means is we create them with the very same people that they seek to serve. We got started a little over 2 years ago. We've launched our first 2 brands this year with more in the works. Before starting Arfa and working on direct-to-consumer technology there, I was the chief technology officer at a company called Glossier for the better part of 4.5 years. And then the 15 years before that, again, working in e-commerce, I can't seem to shake it. I ran a digital design and development agency in Montreal, Canada called Dynamo, whose niche was really working with early stage venture-backed startups in, you guessed it, the direct-to-consumer e-commerce space. So that's me.
Awesome. Well, super exciting to have all three of you on here. Before we talk about scaling, I want to take a step back. Obviously, I think this year has been hectic to say the least for everyone, but in some ways has been quite a tailwind for e-commerce and pushing forwards not only probably each of your individual brands and companies, but also commerce as a whole. One of the reasons I was so excited about this panel is each of you and your companies are approaching commerce in such a really unique and interesting way. I'm curious to hear from each of you, and Brian, maybe we'll start with you and then work our way backwards. When you think about the future of commerce and how COVID might have impacted consumer behaviors, why do you think the way Arfa is approaching commerce is so uniquely positioned, and why is it a strategy that you all have taken on?
Yeah, it's a great question. We're the platform for the creation of multiple brands. So I guess that is indicative of where we see the future. Enormous monolithic brands go from 0 to $1 billion of revenue really quickly. I think when you do that, you increasingly create a brand and a series of products that are targeting the median customer. And the median customer is sort of no one. So for us, consumers are demanding more. They want to be part of not just the product creation, but sort of like the genesis of the brands as well. And it's a little bit easier, and I would argue more authentic to do that on a smaller scale. And I think for years, especially for venture-backed companies, niche was a term we wanted to stay away from. It was growth before everything else, growth before profitability. And in service of growth, sometimes you lose that connection with customers. So it's a long-winded, somewhat meandering answer. For me, I see the future as being more brands that are more resonant, where the people that you're selling them to are involved in every single part of it. We tend to shop for brands that we identify with. Brands are increasingly becoming a part of our identity. So why not give consumers an opportunity to co-create those brands and co-create those products? While it's more difficult than ever to stand out when you do launch something that is new, and while the pandemic has accelerated e-commerce, it's also made it more difficult to find that resonance. I really see the future as being more of these smaller brands that have involved their consumer from day one.
Yeah, great answer. Almost on the other side of things, Jeremy, you all have taken this like unbranded approach. We would love to hear you speak about how Italic has approached things not only from a totally different business model, but also from this unbranded brand approach.
Yeah, there's a lot to go over here, and I'm sure we'll dive in a little bit further. But I feel like at a high level, the way we view the future of e-commerce, if you will, and also just omnichannel in general, is we see a bifurcation. People have been talking about this for a long time, but I think a bifurcation not just towards high-income spenders and low-income spenders, but also on the brand side, where you have pretty large, like Brian mentioned, monolithic brands that have either attracted enough capital to scale or have been around for decades, so that they've reached sufficient scale to be present in many people's minds. On the smaller niche side, I think there's now thousands and thousands of new brands that come every single week, and everyone has the tools to launch an effective brand nowadays. So I think when we think about it that way, I think the way we approach merchandising and product development really is in the lens of, is this an emotional purchase or is this a rational purchase? And for a lot of those customers who will really need to, for example, have a logo on their handbag, there's many thousands of brands that can serve that purpose. But for those who don't necessarily care about that emotional attachment to a logo on a product, but instead seek value and seek quality at a price point that they perceive to be fair, I think that's where Italic does really well. We know we're not anyone's emotional purchase, but I think in cases where, let's say, you want really nice bedding and you don't necessarily want a flashy, logo on it, or you want a good deal on it, then Italic does really well in those cases. And I think to the case of the customer, it's really serving the middle market, in which we have a lot of high income spenders, a lot of low income spenders, but the majority of our members are middle market Americans in big cities as well as small.
That's awesome. Going off of talking to a different type of customer base and how that's changed pretty dramatically. Sybil, obviously you've worked at something like the probably most well-known brands in the world with Net-a-Porter, and now you're working, at a company who's helping these brands have a totally unique type of distribution. Super curious to hear from you. Why was Pop Shop such a specifically interesting thing to you, going from working directly inside of a brand to now more on like the technology partnership marketplace side of things?
Yeah, sure. I think for me, I was kind of spoilt having started my career at Net-a-Porter.com. It's an amazing place to start, but it set the tone pretty high to then match anything. So I'd been looking for a while. I really hadn't seen much innovation in retail. I'm super proud of what Nap created. That clean, monogrammed aesthetic, the white grid, the way we all kind of shop today in a lot of brands. And I'm very proud to have been part of that. But personally, it wasn't inspiring me anymore. I was bored of shopping that way. The excitement had been lost. It had become just functional, which obviously is a huge part of ecom, but I kind of lost that excitement and that discoverability and that connection, in all honesty, with those brands. And I think what's very different with PopShop Live, it's not just ecom with video. That's not how it works. That dynamic that Live brings and that experience is truly unique, and I haven't found anywhere else. It's this idea, I think, with PopShop, we call it this collision of where social, commerce, and entertainment all meet in one place. We can't exist without the other. So all three elements are really important. Our vision is, to empower and to inspire people to expand their identity, experience, and their connection, but within this really self-sufficient ecosystem. So that's something, having worked not on the high street, that I was also really keen about, this idea that we are equipping sellers, our brands, with the tools to find success and to become self-sufficient. That connection and relationship, I think, between the audience and the host is really special and unique. It's a key factor for us when it comes to our high retention rates. It provides all of the things that good ecom does: its reach, its access, its democratization of products, its good organic growth, shared experience, all of those good things. I think particularly pertinent this year at a time when we've lost a lot of connection and we are all remote, especially when you look at physical stores, really missing that engagement and that direct relationship with their customers. I think it's twofold. It helps sellers and brands, they want to safeguard for the future and maybe look to add additional revenue channels to their strategy in case, God forbid, this happens again and they have to close all their physical stores. I think that's something that's amazing that's come out of it. I think as well, looking on the consumer side, there are going to be a lot of younger people growing up who have traditionally looked at mum and dad with traditionally stable jobs, which perhaps have been turned completely on their heads this year. So I think platforms like PopShop also inspire that generation to perhaps think about additional revenue streams, being self-sufficient and being able to essentially start a store from their bedroom, which is pretty special as well.
That's amazing. I think one of the things that each of you have touched on a bit is this community, this aspect of being really close to customer and even leveraging them to have better experiences, building that in between the host and the shopper. One of the things that a friend of Brian and I's, Henry Davis, has said to me about product market fit is you have product market fit when your consumers are behaving irrationally, whether they're referring customers or they're reordering really rapidly. Each of you approach community and like building that relationship with customers in different ways. So I think we'll just bounce this right back to you, since you were already talking about it a bit. With PopShop, how you are approaching the host versus consumer experience, building that relationship. Why do you think that's so important? Especially, you talked a bit about the future consumer who's coming up and is going to be a large buyer. How does PopShop think about approaching building that relationship?
Yeah, so I think all of us hopefully understand that a customer's experience goes beyond just buying a product. And the social and entertainment sides and angles to PopShop are at times even more perhaps relevant than the commercial side. So we have people that tune in for dance routines in some shows. We have really special moments where our audience shares stories with one another and with the host, and it's almost this kind of agony aunt moment where the host pauses from selling and actually just engages with the community. We see huge value in shared experience and co-creation, and that's what community really brings. Like I said, very much like physical retail, the importance of great storytelling, authenticity, expert knowledge. Those aspects really help with conversion, but also cultivate and nurture this really strong little community that comes back week on week. We want people to keep coming back, tuning into their favorite shows and recommending them. Our audience, although remote, are able to communicate obviously through our chat and two-way video, answer questions in real time. I think there are lots of benefits from the customer side. From the seller side, I think really unique as well. A huge value add is they're able to get instant insights from their customers. Mm-hmm. They can literally say, do you prefer this color or that one? Does this price point work for you? What do you want to see more of next week? Our viewers don't hold back. They really share their insights, which I think is really invaluable to the sellers. We also celebrate each other's wins. We have animations that pop up when someone makes a purchase or receive a gift or wins a competition. The whole room joins in and celebrates. It's a really, really important part of the Pop Shop experience for sure.
That's great. Jeremy, I know from a brand perspective, I'm actually part of your Facebook community, and I know that's something that you all leverage quite a bit for both feedback and a little bit of like R&D. Talk to us about how Italic has approached building a community.
Yeah, this is always a fun topic because I feel like community has always been this nebulous, fuzzy term that a lot of ecom brands use, and sometimes even Instagram community. For us, we productize community as two things. One is from a very data-driven merchandising lens of how do we mobilize our members to basically give us information to tell us like what should we make next for them in order to better acquire or better retain our existing members. And then the second lens is on a very specific level. Once we actually enter into product development, what are features that matter on a product that would be important to one of our passionate members who takes the time like you do to join our Facebook community and propose features on a product or feedback on an existing product so we can improve for the future. So on the first one, we're serving on all points of the customer journey, from why you don't join, why you join, when you're onboarding. You give us all this data that we actually look at from the lens of, if we introduce this product, does it allow us to convert our existing or convert members at a better rate? Because we've seen it happen a lot of times through people who joined the email list but didn't convert, for example, or on the flip side, people who are existing members who are suggesting new products. What are the trends that we're seeing on a purely survey level that we should introduce so that we believe it'll better serve the members and they'll better retain over the long haul? And then once we actually get into the product development, that's when we actually take physical samples and post photos, request features. For example, we're developing luggage right now, and we've been doing so for years. And through the many samples that we've gone through, we've always been able to ask, do you prefer YKK zippers? Do you actually want a battery in it, or you don't? Is it even useful? Do you want inner compartments? Things like that. Same with candles, same with our cashmere, so on and so forth. So I think as it scales, one thing that has been shown to be valuable is it's actually become a benefit becoming a member. Typically, it's just purely savings driven. Like, okay, if I become a member, I'm going to save X amount by purchasing 5 times a year. We have a money back guarantee and we have all these other things. But one intangible aspect that isn't quantified is, hey, it does actually feel good to participate in product development. And you feel like you have an ownership in the products that you ultimately would be purchasing. It's been a really big part of our company. And it's almost been organic, in which we didn't intend to build the company this way, but it's turned out in a positive light.
Yeah, I love it. Brian, being at Glossier when you were at Glossier is maybe one of the more famous companies in the space in terms of leveraging community to build new products and just to scale customer base. Talk to us a bit about your time there, as well as how that's informed kind of the entire approach at Arfa.
Yeah, I can't seem to, not that I tried, to distance myself from the Glossier community story, whether it's Glossier community or content in commerce. The community aspect of Glossier, especially early on, like 2014 to 2016, was really fascinating. That brand had an ability to recruit people and built an amazing platform that made everyone feel like they were a part of it. Not every single product at Glossier was developed along those community lines, but some of the most successful ones were. I continue to point to those as success stories. There's this fine line between crowdsourcing and co-creation or co-piloting, and the Italic approach is interesting because it's sort of unbranded, but it isn't. Like Italic asking people for their input on features that they want on the product. We're the product experts. We are going to guarantee, because you have this relationship with our brand, that we're going to ship you something that is of high quality. But if there's some tweaks that we can bring to it that are going to make it better for you, we want to do that. In so doing, you're creating a product that they feel like they were stakeholders in. So not only are your customers going to enjoy it, they're going to be around for the long haul, but they're going to be really excited to tell their friends and family about it. That organic growth, you just can't put a price tag on that. That is absolutely everything. And Glossier had a media component to what they were doing as well, which was the perfect platform to be able to do that storytelling. So it's that co-creation completely out in the open. Who do you want to play your dream cleanser in a movie? I think that was the post that Emily had written on Into the Gloss when we were thinking about making the Milky Jelly cleanser that you're supposed to use on a daily basis. And boy, oh boy, like the comments on that post were just unbelievable. The level of engagement was fantastic. Those commenters that were the most active were the ones that we seeded the product to, the ones that we asked questions about, should we change this ingredient, or what do you ultimately want this to smell like? And that product continues to be a runaway success. We knew what we wanted to build as a product, but we allowed the community to come in and see a little bit behind the scenes. At Arfa, we've taken that approach to the whole next level. It's not what product do you want us to see us build? It's like, what brand needs to exist? We're not constrained by aisles in a drugstore. We have the opportunity to go out and create entire categories. What we're trying to unlock in terms of this organic growth is the storytelling component to brand creation and product development, using that as like super authentic marketing materials I haven't seen done too often before. Not only are we trying to find these brand co-creators, we're ultimately trying to find the faces of our campaign, of these companies. I think that's really a way to retain that authenticity and create these stakeholder customers that, for me, are really the future of commerce.
Thank you all so much. We're going to move over into scaling e-commerce. 3 areas that I think are really interesting that would love to hear from each of you on is 1, scaling initial customer acquisition. How do we think about that? Maybe organic versus paid. Then thinking about what does it look like to scale customer retention and scale customer lifetime value? And then internally, what is it like to scale a team, to scale your technology? How do you have to think about each of those things? Hopefully we can get more tactical here and give some of the folks that are listening some real tangible things to come away with. Starting with acquisition, as you think about starting and then scaling a brand, and I would be remiss here if we didn't talk a little bit about metrics, since that's what Yaguara does. But Brian, maybe we can start with you as you think about whether it was the brands that you worked with early on at Dynamo, at Montreal, or with Glossier, and now with Arfa. How do you think about growing initial acquisition? And then how do you think about this balance in between organic and paid really early on as you're building that initial customer base?
Yeah, I think we should anchor this conversation around profitability. And I lived through the heydays of where profitability didn't matter, and you could just continue to spend to acquire customers to satisfy top line growth. That works to some extent if you have product market fit, if you have customers come back, and if you have the organic complement to that paid channel solve. If you can somewhat efficiently go out and acquire a customer, and that customer can go and acquire you a few more, then I think you've earned the right to spend and go and acquire that customer. But if you don't have that side of things figured out, and that can be the social commerce aspect of things, that can be conversational commerce, that can be whatever you end up wanting it to be, that is super critical. We talk about the sort of like the first wave of direct to consumer that came about to cut the middle person out. Like, I'm going to go direct to customer so I can get you this kind of the same product, but I'm going to get it to you faster and cheaper. And now the new wave of direct to consumer commerce, I think the middle person that we're trying to cut out today is Facebook and Google. They're basically hoovering up all of the margin that we have. And if we continue to dump millions and millions and millions of dollars there to acquire customers, it doesn't matter how much product market fit we have, the brands just won't survive. So what I've seen both in launching new brands and obviously the massive amount of scale that we achieved at Glossier and now launching new brands at Arfa is striking that balance between how you use paid as an accelerant and as a lever to complement your multi-channel and organic efforts. Like, that's the key to success. But if you don't have, and I'll use this as a segue into metrics, if you don't have really good visibility into what channels are performing and how that investment that you're making is paying off, then you're flying blind and you're probably using someone else's money in a reasonably irresponsible way.
So that leads me to ask Jeremy, as a brand that's selling, goods at cost with a subscription, how do you all think about organic versus paid and think about what you can spend on a cost to acquire a customer and those sorts of things as a business with a bit of a different model?
I think that's actually the single hardest question you can ask anyone in the industry right now. You can talk about product forever. You can talk about how we have a unique founding team and whatever. But at the end of the day, the hardest part, I think, in commerce nowadays is to stand out and to acquire a customer profitably or to retain them profitably over the long run. And I think, frankly, it's a really hard question. And I guess when I came into ecom, at least, I thought it was like black and white. But the longer I've spent in it, the more I realized, like, hey, it's actually pretty universally case by case. So I think the way we think about it at Italic is we're self-aware. We know we're not a cool New York brand. As much as that would help, unfortunately, that's not the reality. So I think early on, we did want to spend a lot of time on building earned media and building a strong brand approach. At the end of the day, a lot of how these brands do scale is through paid. And to Brian's point, I totally agree. And I echo that a lot, which is I think the first wave was all about cutting out the middleman and using that language. But really the middleman at the time was like, I'm not going to distribute through Nordstrom's or Target, but instead I'm going to put it on these online channels, which at the time were really affordable and cheap and easy to scale top line on. And now the world is obviously a very different place. So I think for Italic, we really needed to build a sophisticated growth model early on in which we monitored all of our your standard ecom metrics, such as AOV, contribution margin, frequencies, LTVs, and so on and so forth on a cohort level. Of course, I have to give a plug to Yaguara because that's been fantastic, an awesome product to use for us internally at Italics. I think to Brian's point of having visibility, it's basically like you can have the best growth model in the world, but if you're flying blind, like you don't actually know what you're actually putting money into and getting in return. So for Italic, we run a little bit of a different model because it's a subscription product first. We actually realized over time, hey, normally in ecom, you make money through margin and markup. In our case, we basically looked at our 12-month and 16-month LTVs, applied our contribution margins at the time and realized, hey, we're generally taking in around 100 to 120 in basically gross profit at that time. But we would rather take that upfront and basically cap ourselves at that number on a basically 100% gross margin product, but then spread the rest of the value over the course of a year to a member. So hopefully we can deliver far more than $100 in savings to a customer so that they'll stay for years to come. I know we're going to go into retention and LTV in a bit, but I think that's really how we structure growth. And that allowed us to build a lot of models on how we want to pay for a customer. Paid is ultimately how we're probably going to scale from where we are to a much larger company. Of course, we want to build in organic components of that, such as referral. And there's a lot of, I think, things that you can productize around that. But at the end of the day, that's how we view it, is paid. You just have to be good at paid, and you can't like light money on fire, but you do have to, I think, build an in-house competency or outsourced, but a good partner to do so.
Definitely. Sybil, obviously you have a ton of experience working at some huge brands with great brand recognition. Curious first to hear how you all thought about that when you were in-house, and then leading into our next comment around starting to talk about retention and LTV growth. Really interested to hear how you all at Pop Shop Live think about being one of those channels that as people are looking to grow their business, how to be like this new channel and in a new place to engage with customers.
For sure. Net-a-Porter, obviously now and for the last 15 years has been very well known and, like you say, has great brand recognition. Early on, it's the same old story I'm sure you've heard, but people thought we were crazy, this idea of selling designer jeans that no one could feel or touch or try on. And so it took, a while to earn trust around that. We had very desirable product, which obviously helps, visually very appealing, very trend-led, which also helps a huge amount. I think one of the biggest lessons I learned at Net-a-Porter, which there were many, but one of them was that we could stock 500 brands, but we had to be the biggest brand of all. I think that was really interesting when you looked at more and more retailers going online, and your hands are somewhat tied when it comes to product assortment in the designer world, to RRPs. We might have got Gucci first, but once they saw how well they could do with us, of course they sold to other places. Even scenarios where as a buyer, I would be in a showroom and someone would come up and just take a photo of my assortment on the table to replicate that to have the Net-a-Porter buy. As a consumer, it was interesting because essentially you could buy the same pair of shoes at the same price from someone else. And I think what really came into it was this idea of Net-a-Porter being the biggest brand, of wanting to have that male model deliver, the beautifully packaged black box, the kudos of saying you got it from Net-a-Porter and not Harrods. People had Net-a-Porter themed birthday parties with cakes, and it was kind of crazy. So that's always stayed with me about being the biggest brand of all. I think when we look at Pop Shop, we're fairly young, and most of our growth so far has honestly been organically. And that's not to say that we wouldn't look to paid, and that will definitely become more and more of our strategy, I'm sure. But we've been really fortunate in creating and nurturing this really positive community from day one that demonstrates the best practices for us and the best behaviors to ensure that our Pop Shop space is really positive for our audience members, but also for our sellers. And this leading by example and setting the tone as our community grows has really helped. So again, we've touched on it, but peer-to-peer recommendations and the importance of that. We want Pop Shop to be a place where Anyone can come, find their community, find their tribe. If they can't, create it. We've seen great success early on with really engaged, loyal communities where there are real aficionados in that product category, often centered around these subcultures. Within our sellers, we encourage them to support one another, to watch and learn from each other's shows. A huge portion of our organic growth has been on customer and seller recommendations and referrals. We know that for sellers to find success pretty efficiently, they need to have converted a portion of their existing community across to PopShop. Then we have features such as sharing shows and things, allowing our customers to share their favorite shows. And again, I think it's tapping into that kudos of being the first person to discover something and being able to share that with your friends and family. And putting the customer at the center. We empower our customer to choose what they want to watch or what they want to purchase, what they think is best, and enabling them to directly influence the success of a show through how they want to spend their time, their money, their lightning bolts, rather than taking a more traditional retailer approach that's more prescriptive. When it comes to retention and lifetime value and all of those good things, metrics, we have been pretty selective when it comes to our seller portfolio, starting with a few specific categories and building out really solid case studies. We have been looking for areas where there are already existing engaged loyal communities, and this idea of this aficionado who is craving expert knowledge, who knows their stuff, who can spend time in a room with other like-minded people. And that's a key determining factor in how we prioritize launching new verticals. Also breadth of product as well. For retention, that's really important because we want customers to come back week on week. We want them to engage in the same shows. We don't want them to just come once and shop once. No one wants that. So we need engaging content. You have to have a big enough breadth of product in your assortment to allow for that. And then you need that connection and that content and that entertainment, all of that good stuff. It's crazy. We've seen, in all honesty, that PopShop can obviously impact a seller's top line, but also bottom line, less overheads, more flexibility. I know we're talking in like crazy times, but honestly, we've seen sellers within a couple of months shift and make PopShop their primary sales channel, actually reviewing their existing strategy with their physical stores, even with their eCom, and putting everything up on PopShop first as their primary revenue channel, changing the way they think about their pre-existing revenue channels, which is pretty special.
It's amazing. I think we've seen from working with data from a lot of different customers that live engagement is a huge opportunity for the future of commerce. I think, Jeremy, on the other side of things, for you all, obviously, LTV and retention is all about like subscribers not churning. Talk a little bit about like how you all have decided to really invest in building out a really robust product catalog in order to presumably retain customers for as long as possible by pushing them across to different, not only products, but different product categories.
Yeah, I think on the transactional model, which is I assume what the majority of the audience runs, you either have two playbooks. One, you make a product that is high enough margin to afford acquiring a customer and profit on first order, which is of course important. And of course, your customers will come back and purchase many more times, but generally that's one model of doing things. And then I think the second is you have a high frequency or subscription model. Let's say it's beauty or a skincare, in which like if you deliver a value proposition that works and people really love it and build an affinity towards it, this is CPG as well. People become loyal and you don't necessarily have to be profitable on day one, but I think you can get payback fairly quickly. When we built the assortment with Italic, the thought process was really twofold. One was when we look at large scale ecom, I would say the biggest exits like in venture are not single product, single brand, single category types of companies. They're actually very unsexy type of companies like a Wish or a Jet or a Chewy. And those are like the ones that people don't really talk about in ecom, but they're actually the biggest. They're not exited, all of them, but I think they have the largest transactional volume in general. And a lot of that was through paid as well. For Italic, the merchandising lens was how do we build a product assortment large enough to justify a customer coming back many times and delivering enough value over the course of a year to prove to them like, hey, if I stay around for a while, I'm going to save many thousands of dollars by sticking on Italic just for $100. And I think that the two angles we take is like on a qualitative level, we want the products that we deliver to hopefully deliver for the membership fee to be paid back in one order or two, in which if you have a cart of 2 to 3 items, let's say it's your t-shirt and your cookware, paid itself back immediately. I think on a more objective level, it's this category mature online. Are we not the first in it? Is it one that doesn't require specific logistics complexity, such as like furniture or food or subscription? Finally, is this a product that is historically sold at a 5, 10, 15x multiple on costs to which Italic can actually be perceived as a very substantial discount and savings for equivalent quality. On the merchandising lens, we've worn that merchant hat for a long time as we built out the assortment. I think as we transition into the membership model, now it's all about frequency. So now we're transitioning downstream into things that don't necessarily qualify as like luxury goods or soft goods per se, but more so into things like pets or travel or even fitness and outdoors, which are things that you wouldn't traditionally associate with luxury, just to make sure that we can both attract new members who wouldn't have previously signed up because of our assortment, or secondly, really the bundle becomes larger so that a member is more incentivized to stay for years to come because they are looking forward to purchasing the new products. I know it's a long answer, but that's how we view it.
No, that's brilliant. Brian, obviously with Glossier and now with Arfa, there's been not only a massive expansion of product catalog, but then also Glossier with branded retail. Just curious from experience with Glossier and now Arfa, curious to see how you thought and how those companies think about product and brand catalog expansion. And then on the other side, how do you think about multi-channel? I know obviously as being chief technology officer, you care an awful lot about customer data. One of the obviously best things about the promise of D2C is like we're much closer to customer and understand them better so that we can create better products and better brand experiences. Would love for you to talk about how that's been approached in the past and how you're thinking on that may have evolved over time.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. I think maybe I'll start on the metric side of things. And I love the story that Jeremy told. We're so focused normally on LTV to CAC. And I think that's maybe one of the weirdest ratios to look at because we can fall in love with telling the story that eventually this will pay back and we can afford to spend these like ridiculous amounts of money to acquire customers. I don't think that's true. At Glossier, there was a disciplined approach to contribution margin on that first purchase. And I think that's the right discipline. We've carried that discipline forward at Arfa as well. We're very focused on AOV, units per transaction. The margin that we can make on a product that should inform whether or not we have the right to go and make that product. If we can't make money on it, we shouldn't bring it to market or convince ourselves like, well, we're just going to expand these categories enormously. So eventually these loss leaders will prove their worth. I think that's a slippery slope, especially today, because it's just so easy to create products. But Glossier, because we were really focused on margin and we were operating in an industry where margins are typically quite high, it made sense to expand the categories. And also like our community was leading us there. They wanted more of Glossier's point of view on this particular category and this particular category. And I think they did that exceptionally well. And then also opening up other channels. At Arfa, instead of category expansion, going back to this idea that we're afraid of eventually needing to market to the median customer, we think like, well, when our first brand, for example, is a brand called Hickey, it's a sweat brand. When there's an opportunity for a category expansion that isn't an obvious fit into the category of sweat, but that we have a community of folks that are leading us in a certain direction, then we'll chat with them about creating a brand. But the same principles will apply. Can we create products and bring them to market in a way that is in fact profitable? So we're really hyper-focused on contribution margin as an example. And I don't want you all to think that I'm allergic to paid. Paid has a place, but you have to anchor that somewhere. You need to know what you can afford to spend and then how you need to augment that spend with other channels so that you can be around for the long haul. I think that's ultimately most important. And then there was the second part of your question related to customer data and how we take advantage of these new channels that are opening up every single day. And I think that's what we're doing really well at Arfa. So we've created our own bespoke technology and data stack, and we deliver that to our brand managers so that they have the best possible experience for creating content that will help to drive sales, but also allows them to create web experiences that stand out from the sea of more template-driven sites that you see everywhere. And in so doing, creating the technology in the way that we've done, where we allow them to take advantages of opportunities that will present themselves. If we need to do a partnership here, it's really easy for us to get them the information. Where the Arfa brain sits at the middle, we're responsible for collecting all of our customers' data. And the way that I look at that is that our customers are lending it to us for some amount of time. It's our responsibility to protect it and to use it to create better site experiences for them, better tools for our teams to be able to interact with them, for us to be able to listen better, respond faster, but then ultimately give it back to them if they ask us for it. And I think like going back to this approach where you're giving all these decisions away to a platform, you're not really in control of that data. And I think that is something that brands of the future need to get ahead of. Like, how do we make sure that we're collecting this and using it in the way that is right? And that starts with you having like super fine-grained control over it.
That was great. It was a very long question that you answered quite succinctly. We're going to leave around 10 minutes for some questions here. I think like one of the really interesting things that I heard from each of you all that is like, there's been a pretty large shift over the last 10 years, like 2010 to 2020, it was really around like, how do we think about top line? Acquiring a customer was really cheap. And now just the way you approach customer metrics has totally shifted, and who investors are willing to capitalize has totally shifted. I think that's a really interesting theme to hear across. We've got our first question here from Eric. What are your thoughts on attribution? If I'm spending money on Facebook, Google, email marketing, etc., how do I decide where my customers are coming from, and how do I allocate budgets? So Brian, I'm just going to throw that back to you since you're unmuted.
Good strategy, Jeremy and Sybil. Stay muted on the multi-touch attribution question. I have a bit of a soapbox here on multi-touch attribution. I think it's an effort. Getting super specific around where you got your customer from it's a really slippery slope. There are a lot of large vendors out there that are going to sell you a multi-touch attribution model that will guarantee, they'll tell you very specifically where you acquired that customer from. I'm here to tell you that you can't actually do that in a way that is right for your customer or that is not creepy. So I want to build brands and products along with my customers. I don't really want to trick them. I can't work with a platform that is treating your data or manipulating your data in a way that I wouldn't want my data manipulated. I do think it's important to monitor those channels and then just decide what is right for your brand. It can be a weighted average. You can use something, it sounds super unsophisticated, as last click attribution, but last click kind of works. But here are the different levers. Here's how we've deployed spend. When we deploy it in the following way, we're seeing this return. So this channel mix seems important to us. I wish there was a one-stop solution or an easy canned answer. I think the reality is it depends, and it needs to be fluid. The more visibility you have into the relative traffic that you're getting for those channels and the handle that you have on, say, like last click attribution, the more you can do some experimentation and you can pull some different levers, you can figure it out for yourself. But you got to be prepared to constantly to stay on top of it, and to be okay with it being right for a couple of months and then being completely wrong a few months after that, and having the flexibility to adjust.
So we're going to move on to the next question, and I want to pose this to each of you because I think you'll each have different answers. The next question is, what are 3 important vocab words an outsider needs to learn to feel like in the know with e-commerce? There's lots of 3-letter acronyms out there. There's lots of very specific words. Sybil, interested to start with you. What are 3 words that you feel someone needs to understand to really understand the basics of commerce?
It's not a word per se, but for us, a new metric we look at, which is really interesting, dollars per minute, a new metric. That's really important as we look at live streaming. You know, we don't own live streaming. It's going to become a commodity in the future, and that's okay. I think that's something that more and more brands and businesses will be looking to, rather than just looking at how much someone is spending or how many units they're purchasing. What is their value over time, especially in a live environment? That becomes really important. And then the engagement is really important. So looking at that on the connection side. So looking at your customer behaviors, especially in a live environment, how they're finding that connection and what's resonating with them when it comes to product, to social, to entertainment. A third one, perhaps retention. We've spoken about it a bit, but it's really important. What's keeping them coming back? What are you doing well? What are you doing the best to ensure that they're coming back to you, they're shopping more from you, they're engaging more with you, they're telling all their friends and family about you, the kudos and recommendation and all of that. Without our communities, we can have the best product, tech, or physical product in the world, but we rely on them. So I think retention is really important as well.
Jeremy, your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm going to skip past AOV, LTV, all that stuff you can kind of figure out by yourself. I think three metrics that don't get talked a lot about in ecom, but are actually really important are one, cash conversion cycle. This is like basically the period by which if you invest in inventory, for example, when are you going to get that back? And typically when you're starting out, it might be months, it might be 6 months, it could be longer. I think great companies, if you can get great payment terms with your vendors, they can basically float you a lot of wiggle room to acquire aggressively into a repurchase very quickly. So I think cash conversions was one people like to think about conceptually, but when you actually start tracking it, it's actually a really powerful tool for your balance sheet. Secondly, I would say is, I know we alluded to this, getting a really strong understanding of your contribution margins and all the variables that go into contributing to your costs, I think is critical. You have to get a good understanding of that. Finally, payback period. If you are on a subscription product or you are on, let's say, FabFitFun or Stitch Fix, or you're like us, are you getting payback month 1? Are you getting payback month 6? Are you on a 12 to 24 month period, or even on a transactional level? If you believe you can sell a one-time purchase multiple times over the course of a year, then you actually can invest more aggressively into growing with paid ahead of time. So I think those are three that I would recommend you just be aware of as you scale. But of course, the most immediate would be AOV, LTV, like that type of stuff.
Brian, you want to wrap us up here?
Yeah, those are awesome. I will similarly stay clear of maybe some of the more finance focused ones. I have been increasingly focused the last 18 months on TTFP, which is the acronym for time to first paint. What I've observed over the last couple of years is this progressive slowdown of websites. Servers have never been cheaper, and yet sites are getting slower and slower and slower. There's a reason for that, but the fact that we're not thinking about performance as a feature as leaders is a real problem. Across the board, I think we should be seeing mobile conversions being 50% at a bare minimum. For direct-to-consumer companies, it would behoove all of us to focus more on performance. We look at this is super maniacally, and we won't introduce features that slow down the performance. Time to first paint is one that's super interesting to me. I would be remiss not to say conversion rate. I think conversion rate is something that you need to look at, and don't necessarily give that away to Google and let Google tell you what your conversion rate is. Decide for yourself what is a conversion. You can have different conversion rates, and you should be looking at your funnel, and you should be deciding what content is working, what product assortment is working, so on and so forth. Those are the two that I'm super focused on these days. I love the contribution margin one. We really like to look at basket size or units per transaction. I think that's like a good indicator of how much someone likes the brand and how much they trust it, is they're willing to put more than one thing in their cart. Especially with free returns these days, there's very little risk to just trying a product. But if you're going to try out a couple of products, it means you're willing to give a brand a chance. I think that's a pretty good leading indicator as someone's willingness to come back. I'd say I'd steer clear of the finance ones.
Those are all good answers. And you also happened to answer the other question someone asked about template websites and how you can make those stand out. To be really honest, speed is one of the biggest ways to do that. And if you look at speed layered on top of conversion, those things are indirectly proportionate. We have maybe time for one more, and this one will be maybe a little bit more anecdotal, and we'll try to answer it quickly. But for each of you, someone asked, is there ever a time when any of you felt like giving up, and what kept you going, whether it's in founding a company or in a really hard role? So Brian, why don't you start us out? I'm sure you probably have multiple answers for this.
I've had a 20-something plus year career in e-commerce, and I've been so fortunate to work with so many amazing people. I've never wanted to abandon them or let them down, and they've always repaid that favor to me. Days are going to be tough for sure, but I can't point to a single instance where I was like, I want to pack it in.
That's great. Jeremy, and for yourself, multiple time founder, any times you felt like giving up?
Well, every week, probably. No, yeah, definitely. I've definitely had plenty of times in my journey where I'm like, oh, this is too hard. I should just kick the can and call it a day. But then you realize, hey, I think if you really love what you're doing, you believe in the mission enough to kind of grind through. 99% of the time is not fun stuff, or at least it's not the sexy stuff. You just grind through it. At the end of the day, you're going to have those couple wins that push you through those hard times. So I feel like I've definitely had a lot of times where it's really tough to have confidence and motivate the team and rally everyone around a mission. But I think if you do genuinely believe in it, then you're going to find a way through.
So we'll finish off with you. Obviously, you've moved from quite large companies to smaller companies. I'm sure that has come with intrinsic challenges in itself. What has kept you motivated across all of those different experiences?
I think for me, the biggest thing was like to keep learning, and that sounds really indulgent. I'm obviously not the business owner, so I'm able to say that, I guess. But that's when I decided to leave Net-a-Porter, when I was like 29 and felt I couldn't learn anymore, which was a massive alarm bell for me. It wasn't a case of giving up, but it was a case of realizing I'd done all I could there. And then I lived for innovation, that magic I saw at the beginning of Net-a-Porter and was fortunate to be a part of, and that's what's always propelled me. That's something I really see with PopShop, and living for the consumer as well. That's why we're all in it, right? You want something you can't find out there, so you go and you join a team that's either doing it or you create it. For us at PopShop as well, we really strongly believe that whoever chooses to embrace and master live streaming commerce is going to really define the future of e-com generally in the next decade or so.
Those are all really great answers. I think that the only thing I can add to that at all is, whenever people ask me about starting a company or joining an early stage company, if you're in it for the money, there's much better and easier ways to make money. Get into just the high growth early stage companies, you can't not do it. And if you have the passion for it, then nothing else matters. Thank you guys so much. Really great insights. And hopefully I was able to draw some of the wisdom out of you all for everyone listening.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. Thanks for hosting.
Thanks so much. Thank you.
Thanks for having us, Hawk.